people who are Christians or who call themselves Christians, they understand what causes envy. And maybe I'm mistaken in this regard, but envy is basically a reaction to missing something internal to yourself. So therefore, you will react to that outside world with, with malice if you yourself feel less than everyone else, one would assume. So if that is the
Right.
correct way to describe envy, the solution to it seems to be, to me at least, become Christian or become religious in some way. Find meaning in your life, hopefully metaphysically as well.
Yes, and I think you're right. But I would want to add. I think there's a 1-2 punch with that. The person who is envious has an ache or a vacuum or a void inside them they're wanting to fill. Which I would, as a preacher, I would say, well, turn to Christ. Let Christ forgive you. Call upon the name of the Lord, and you'll be saved. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a metaphysical assumption about the world that the envious can draw on, and they frequently do draw on it. And this gets into economics. And that is the assumption that the world is a zero sum game. Okay, if I assume that the world is a zero sum game and the world is a pie, and you get a bigger piece of pie, if the pie is fixed, that means a bigger piece for you means a smaller piece for me. Right? So I look at the wealthy. I look at the people who are advantages I don't have, and I assume if I have a zero sum mentality that's their wealth is the cause of my poverty. Their big piece of pie is the cause of my small piece of pie. But God is a giving God. God is a generous God, and God has created a world in which the pie grows. So I would much rather have a smaller piece of a growing pie than a larger piece of a shrinking one, right? So if wealth accumulates and compounds and the available resources and the standard of living is growing, I would rather have a little sliver of a piece of pie that's 10 times bigger than the other one than a quarter of the pie that is the constant static size. And so if you've got that metaphysical assumption on the one hand, and then you have the ache that you reference, the lack, the ravenous lust that the unforgiven heart has, and you combine those two, the results are deadly.
Yeah, and I suppose my comment to that would be using the same kind of analogies. In the modern psyche, what we're seeing right around the world is obviously everything's around redistributive policies. Everybody believes that there's a zero-sum game, and the approach to the zero-sum game is not the one that we have been seeing in the West for the last, say, 50 years since World War II, which is let's create bigger pie and allow, free market capitalism to allow people to have a better standard of life, which ultimately has worked. But what we're now seeing is that people don't kind of believe in that. Suppose you could argue it was since 2008, the financial crash, but I think it probably predates that personally. And if you look at it, the policies that we're seeing around the world is kind of like, don't bake a bigger pie, because that kind of takes work, and you may actually have to be in the kitchen for a bit. And it's much easier to take the existing pie and just cut it a little bit smaller. I mean, that's far easier, right?
Yeah. Right. It's easy and it's lazy. And then when the disastrous end result happens, like what's happened to Venezuela or what's happening now to California, the envy can always find a culprit somewhere else. They can always scapegoat it. And they can say, well, so California outlawed, they're phasing out outlawing gas-powered vehicles, and now they're worried about the electric grid and telling people not to plug in their electric cars. And they're blaming it on climate change. They're not blaming it on their own foolish policies. They're blaming it on climate change. There's always going to be some sort of scapegoat somewhere.